Chapter 3 Echoes in the Fog. Elias crouched low behind the charred remains of a garden wall, the map spread across his knees, his fingers trembling as they traced the lines he'd sketched only hours ago. Red Tooth was smaller than he'd expected, or maybe it had been larger once, before everything blackened. Half the buildings were hollowed-out husks. Burnt curtains flapped from windowless frames. The fog clung to the ruins like ash. The compass in his palm clicked softly with every twitch of his wrist, the only sound he truly trusted anymore. He could feel something in the air, not the kind of dread that came from being hunted. This was different. Observed, he scanned the street again, empty, except for a collapsed church and what might have been a diner, now just a broken sign and rusted stools. And yet, he hadn't been alone since entering Red Tooth. Across the square, beyond a crooked iron fence, a figure had flickered into view earlier, quick, too controlled for one of them. It didn't stagger, it watched. Now nothing. The silence dug its teeth into him again. He lowered the map and drew the journal page from his coat, the one with the spiral. Red Tooth circled, scribbled in the margins. Don't trust the ones who pause. He tried to remember who had given him that page. The name flashed. Lauren? But the face never followed. A soft crunch of glass. Elias stiffened. He turned slowly, rising just enough to peer over the edge of the wall. She stood near a phone booth strangled in ivy, a fork gripped in one hand like a blade, her other hand dragging a length of red yarn. Wild hair, barefoot, staring straight at him. She didn't speak, didn't move. Neither did he. For a moment, time fell flat. Then she smiled, not kindly, more like a wolf who recognizes another wolf in a different skin. Juniper Wells stepped out from behind the phone booth with theatrical grace, raising her arms as if presenting herself to an invisible audience. Her eyes didn't blink. Her lips moved faintly, reciting something that only she could hear. Elias didn't move. She circled toward him slowly, weaving the red yarn behind her like she was drawing a line of possession. When she reached within 10 feet, she stopped. She tilted her head. "You're real," she said, too loudly for the silence. "A real one, huh?" Elias rose slowly, hands open, palms empty. He didn't speak, couldn't, but he nodded once. She narrowed her eyes. "You don't talk." He nodded again. "Good." She took a step closer, scrutinizing him. "They talk too much, the echoes. Always shouting, always weeping. You're quiet? That means something." She pulled the fork closer to her chest. "If you're not real, I'll gut you. Fair warning." He didn't flinch. Juniper smiled again, but it was strange, layered with twitching nerves and unreadable grief. "Red Tooth's not yours," she said. "It's mine, but I'll share. If you promise to stay outside room 19, Elias didn't know what that meant. But he nodded again. Juniper twirled the yarn once around her wrist, then let it fall. "Follow the thread, quiet one." They walked in silence, side by side, through the skeleton of Red Tooth. She hummed to herself now and then, skipping over cracks in the pavement. Elias kept one eye on her and one on the fog. Every so often, Juniper would pause and write something on the sides of buildings with a stub of charcoal. Eyes in dust, teeth beneath. He remembers. Elias tried not to look too long at the messages. They passed the hollowed-out frame of a gas station. The pumps were melted. The walls were black. A corpse sat behind the counter, skeletal fingers still gripping a receipt roll. Juniper stopped. "They burned the air here," she said quietly. "Tried to smoke out the silence. Didn't work." Elias raised an eyebrow. She answered without being asked. I was in a place with locked doors. When the fog came, the doors stayed locked. She turned toward him suddenly, eyes flaring. I didn't die in there. Elias nodded once. Respect, not fear. Juniper smirked. You're not as dumb as you look. The sun was beginning to dip behind the broken rooftops. Elias stopped, opened his notebook, and sketched the layout of the street. Juniper watched him with curious silence, her head tilted. You mapped the dead? She asked. He pointed to a small X on the page, then to the sky, then made a gesture, a slow circle with his hand, ending at his temple. She watched, then grinned. Ah, circles in the head. Yours spin too, huh? She sat cross-legged on the curb, folding her legs beneath her like a child at story time. You want a story, quiet one? I'll give you one. You won't hear it, but you'll see. She took a handful of pebbles from her pocket and began to lay them in a spiral on this pavement. Once upon a time, a whisper was born in a hospital. The whisper got louder. It told people to listen to their own blood. She dropped a final stone in the center. They listened too hard, and now we're here. Elias stared at the spiral, then looked behind them. The fog moved differently now, like it was listening. They found shelter in a half-collapsed home, 2 walls and a fireplace still intact. Elias built a small fire using old chair legs and tattered books. Juniper crouched nearby, eyes wide in the flicker of the flames. I like fire, she said. It doesn't lie. Elias pulled out the map again, adjusted the compass, then looked at her. She understood without words. Red Tooth's dead, she said. What you're looking for, it's buried. She leaned closer. Or waiting. He pointed at the map again to a section circled 3 times. She didn't look. I don't go there. He stared at her. Juniper gritted her teeth. I don't go there. That place remembers. Then, quieter, that's where the screaming starts again. Elias watched her curl her arms around herself, rocking slightly. She wasn't lying. Something was coming, something that still lived in the silence. The fire crackled in soft bursts, sending shadows dancing across the crumbling walls. Elias sat with the map stretched beside him, but his eyes weren't on it. He was watching Juniper. She had fallen asleep against a support beam, knees tucked under her chin, fingers curled tight around a broken doll's arm she had plucked from the rubble. Every few minutes she whispered something in her sleep, names, fragments. Once she laughed. Elias looked away. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. The quiet here was different than in the last towns. Denser, like it had roots. He pulled out the compass and watched it spin once, then settle. Always southeast, always the same pull. He didn't know what was drawing him, only that it never lied. From outside the ruin, something scraped, a dragging sound, deliberate. Elias moved silently to the edge of the wall, peering through a gap. The fog pulsed. Something moved just beyond it. Not fast, not loud, just there. He held his breath. The shape in the fog grew taller, more defined. Its arms hung too low. Its head twitched in slow, unnatural jerks. It stepped once, paused, then again. One of them, but it didn't moan, didn't sniff the air, didn't even reach forward. It stopped directly in front of the house and stood perfectly still. Elias backed away, breath shallow, and nudged Juniper's shoulder. She snapped awake, eyes instantly alert. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She nodded once and reached for the fork at her side. The two crouched low behind the fireplace, listening, or in Elias's case, feeling. The creature didn't enter, didn't scratch, just stood. The air grew thicker, heavier. Elias glanced at Juniper. She mouthed, "Don't move. Don't breathe like a person." He closed his eyes and waited. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The fire burned lower, its light no longer reaching the windows. Juniper shifted once, then froze again, eyes locked on the door. The figure outside remained motionless. Elias studied it now with a different kind of fear, not of teeth or blood, but of intelligence. It didn't look inside, it didn't even twitch, it just existed, like it was waiting for a sound, like it remembered something it had been before. Then, at last, it turned, walked 3 steps, paused, turned again, and vanished into the fog. Juniper let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. "They're different here," she whispered. "This town, it teaches them." Elias looked at her. She stared back, eyes haunted, certain. It's not just rot anymore, it's echo. They didn't sleep again that night. By morning the fog had thinned, but the town felt tighter, like walls had grown overnight. Elias packed the map and signaled to Juniper. They'd move at daylight. She followed, quieter now, less theatrical. Her madness had settled into a colder kind of clarity. As they passed a series of brick houses collapsed inward, Juniper stopped, scratched a symbol into a mailbox with her fingernail. A spiral. "Why?" Elias asked with his hands. She shrugged. None of them moved. Juniper whispered, "Welcome to the choir." They crouched behind the crumbling lip of a broken fountain, watching the 7 unmoving figures. Juniper called them the choir. "They don't bite unless you make sound," she whispered. "Or maybe they do. I never tried." She blinked slowly, then looked at Elias. "You want to try?" He shook his head. They waited, breath low, until the sun moved behind a tower and cast the square in shade. The figures never moved. Their faces were slack, their clothes long rotted, skin sunken and gray. But they weren't just dead. They were listening. Elias pointed to the far side of the courtyard, a hardware store with a partially open door. Juniper nodded. They moved in perfect silence, circling wide, taking each step like dancers on cracked glass. Inside the store, the dust was thick and undisturbed. Shelves of batteries, ropes, and rusting tools stood like forgotten altars. Elias scanned quickly, sweeping supplies into his satchel. Juniper lingered near a shelf of paint cans. She opened one and smiled at the color. "Red. Blood of gods," she whispered. Elias tapped her arm. "Quiet, firm, time to go." They exited through the back of the store, slipping into a narrow alley littered with broken pallets and scattered tools. Juniper carried a crowbar now. She twirled it like a baton. Elias stopped beside a chain-link fence overgrown with vines. In the distance, a siren tower leaned sideways, speakers rusted and silent. Once, maybe it warned the town. Now it was just another skeleton. Juniper sat on a low crate and began sharpening her fork against a brick. "I think Redtooth was one of the last holdouts," she said softly. "People locked it down, tried to wait it out." She gestured vaguely. "Didn't work." Elias sat beside her and wrote in his notebook. "No safe zones?" She snorted. "There were, briefly, but people are just like them when it gets bad enough. Hungry, twitchy, quiet until they're not." She looked out at the fog. "Somewhere out there, someone's still pretending there's a solution." Then she leaned in close. "But we know better, don't we?" Elias didn't nod this time. He just looked away. They found an old apartment building at the edge of the city square, the lobby littered with rotting luggage and overgrown vines. Juniper pried the elevator doors open and dropped a flare down the shaft. It fell for a second, then landed with a metallic thud. No echo, just emptiness. "Clear," she said, not that Elias could hear it. They made camp on the second floor behind a barricade of old furniture and broken doors. Elias built a fire in a rusted sink. Juniper stacked books to make a wall, giggling as she arranged them by spine color. He sketched a map of Red Tooth piece by piece, taking it from memory and instinct. Juniper sat beside him when she was done. "Is it worth it?" she asked. "Marking it all, knowing where the ghosts sleep?" He looked at her and pointed to the symbol he always drew in the corner, the spiral. "Still moving," he signed. She stared at the symbol, then nodded. "You're right. It hasn't caught us yet." The night air chilled as the fire dimmed. Juniper dozed against the wall, twitching slightly, muttering nonsense under her breath. Elias stood at the window, watching the fog weave through the street lamps like smoke from old wounds. Then he saw them. Not the undead, people. 4 shadows, moving with purpose. One had a flashlight with a red gel cover. They spoke in hushed tones, rifles in hand, uniforms pieced together from scavenged armor and jackets with old security tags. Not scavengers, not soldiers, something in between. Elias ducked back inside, heart racing. He tapped Juniper's arm twice. She stirred, then sat upright. Her face hardened immediately. "You saw them?" He nodded. She hissed, "People are worse than the biters." Elias grabbed his pack. Juniper reached for her fork and crowbar. They knew the drill. They made their way down the stairwell, slow, controlled. Elias moved like he had back in the field, deliberate steps, every angle cleared before the next. Juniper followed, silent for once. Below, voices grew clearer, male, calm, measured, professional. "Saw movement near the square, might be holdouts. Orders are to bring 'em in." Elias froze at the base of the stairs, just behind a wall. He saw boots, mismatched armor. One of the men had a cattle prod. Another wore mirrored goggles over a gas mask. Juniper gripped his shoulder, eyes wide. She mouthed, "Now?" He nodded, but before they moved, the door behind them creaked. Juniper turned first. Another figure stepped in from the back. Gun raised. "Don't run," the man said. His voice was smooth, assured, dead behind the eyes. Elias raised his hands. Juniper didn't. The man took a step forward, weapon aimed between them. "That's it. Nice," and the lights went out. The building plunged into blackness. Elias didn't wait. He dove left, pulling Juniper with him behind the stairwell column as the flashlight beam from the rifleman's weapon cut through the space they had just occupied. Juniper didn't scream, didn't speak. She moved. With the silence of instinct, she dropped low and swept a loose brick into her hand. A red laser flicked across the wall beside her. She didn't think. She threw. The brick shattered the flashlight's casing with a crack. Shouting, "Move! They're still here!" Boots thundered down the hall. Elias yanked Juniper up, and they ran. No plan, only movement, only survival. They barreled through an apartment unit, leaping over a collapsed bed frame and smashing through a warped bathroom door. Elias turned and slammed it shut, jamming a mop through the broken handle. Juniper dragged a bookcase across the opening. Together they caught their breath. Then, bang! The outer stairwell door burst open. The voices split, one moving to flank, another moving fast. "They'll be looking for your silence," Juniper whispered, breath ragged. "That's what makes you stand out." Elias nodded, then motioned, "Split up." Juniper froze, shook her head hard. "Number, I can be loud. I can lead. You're better quiet." He looked at her, then nodded. She smiled. "Besides, I owe them a lullaby." She slipped out the side window like a shadow with a grin. Gunfire cracked through the night. Juniper screamed purposefully, and the echoes bounced down the block. Elias darted through the opposite hallway, down a back stairwell, boots barely touching the ground. The firelight from their makeshift camp still flickered upstairs. He ducked through the laundry chute and landed hard in the basement. Wet. Dust. No lights. He pressed against the wall, listening, not with ears but with everything else. Upstairs, boots slammed again. He heard a man yell. Then laughter, junipers, distant, wild. He moved fast, weaving through collapsed machinery past moldy washing machines and waterlogged boxes. He found a storm door half-rusted shut and kicked it once, twice, until it creaked open. Cool air, fog, freedom. He sprinted across a narrow alley and into the shadow of another building. Somewhere across the street, a flare burst red into the sky. A signal. The men were regrouping. Elias hid behind a dumpster and watched three of them pass, scanning, shouting commands in low tones. They weren't just looking to kill. They were looking to take. He saw the cattle prod again. Zip ties on a belt. One of them carried a syringe kit. Not just soldiers. Collectors. Elias's pulse quickened. He scribbled in his notebook, "Why Red Tooth? What are they after?" Then he stopped writing. The sound of gravel crunching, someone right behind him. A man's voice, soft, confident. "There you are." Elias turned too late. The man struck hard, flashlight cracking against his temple. He fell sideways into the alley wall, dazed, pain blooming behind his eyes. "Easy," the man said. "We want you alive." He grabbed Elias by the coat, yanking him up, then froze, because Juniper's voice rang out behind them, cold and clear. "You shouldn't touch the quiet one." The man turned, too slow. Juniper swung the crowbar into the side of his head with a sound like a broken radio. He dropped instantly. Elias staggered back. Juniper was breathing heavy, blood on her hands, but her grin never wavered. "Welcome to Red Tooth," she whispered. "Population, us." And somewhere deeper in the fog, the rest of the men began to close in.